life of Saint Anthony. We're almost near and towards the end. God willing, next week will be the last time, and then we will pick up something more appropriate for the journey of Lent. Let us go on forward and discuss. We will start by the death of Amun and Anthony's vision thereof. So Amun was one of the disciples of Saint Anthony, one of the monks, and we saw his story earlier last week. We saw how he was married and he left when he found that his wife was, because of her infidelity, he left all and he became a monk. And even though he was of old age when he was actually a monk, yet he had great perseverance and great simplicity in his character. And there are many stories that are found in the paradise of the Desert Fathers that speak of him and, of course, of St. Anthony. So, moving forward from paragraph 60, it says, "This is so, for once again he was sitting on the mountain." So, St. Anthony was sitting on a mountain and looking up, saw in the air someone being borne upwards, a soul that was moving up to heaven. And there was much joy among those who met him. Then, wondering in deeming a company of that kind to be blessed, he prayed to learn what this might be. And immediately a voice came to him, "This is the soul of Amun, the monk of Nitria." Nitria is Natrun, Wadi Natrun. So this is the area where the monasteries of Saint Bishoy and the monastery of Sorien are located, and Paramos. Now, Amun had persevered in the discipline up to old age, and the distance from Nitria to the mountain where Anthony was 13 days' journey. Remember, Saint Anthony used to be in Nitria. He left and he went down to a mountain where the monastery of Saint Anthony is. And so this distance, we're going to see a map real quick. This distance is about a 13-day journey. So if we look over here, where it says Anthony, the one that's close to the sea, that's the monastery of St. Anthony. This is where St. Anthony was located. Now, Nitria was up right here. Let's move on forward. Now, Amun had persevered in discipline up to old age, and the distance from Nitria to the mountain where Anthony was 13 days' journey. The companions of Anthony, therefore, seeing the old man amazed, asked to learn, and heard that Amun was just dead, and he was well known, for he had stayed there very often, and many signs had been wrought by his means, and this is one of them. Once, when he had need to cross the river called Lycus, it was the season of the flood, he asked his comrade Theodoros to remain at a distance, that they should not see one another naked as they swam the water. Then when Theodoros was departed, he again felt ashamed even to see himself naked. While therefore he was pondering, filled with shame, on a sudden he was borne over to the other side. And so he crossed over to the other side without touching the water. Theodorus, therefore, himself, being a good man, approached, and seeing Amun across first, without a drop of water falling from him, inquired how he had got over. And when he saw that Amun was unwilling to tell him, he held him by the feet and declared that he would not let him go before he had learned it from him. So Amun, saying the determination of Theodorus, especially from what he had said, and having asked him to tell no man before his death, told him that he had been carried and placed on the further side, and that he had not even set foot on the water, nor was that possible for man, but for the Lord alone and those whom he permits. So he did for the great, as he did for the great apostle Peter. Theodorus, therefore, told this after the death of Amun, and the monks to whom Anthony spoke concerning Amun's death marked that day, and when the brethren came from Nitria 30 days after, they inquired of them and learned that Amun had fallen asleep at that day and the hour in which the old man had seen his soul borne upwards, and both these and others marveled at the purity of Anthony's soul, how he had immediately learned that which was taking place at a distance of 13 days' journey, and had seen the soul as it was taken up. Moving on, of Count Archelaus and the Virgin Polycration. And Archelaus to the Count, on a time having found him in the outer mountain, asked him merely to pray for Polycratia and Leodosia, an excellent and Christian maiden, for she suffered terribly in the stomach and sighed through over much discipline, and was altogether weakly of body. Anthony prayed therefore, and the Count noted the day in which the prayer was made. And having departed to Leodosia, he found the maiden whole, and having inquired when and on what day she was relieved of her infirmity, he produced the paper on which he had written the time of paper, and having read it, he immediately showed the writing on the paper. And all wondered when they knew that the Lord had relieved her of pain at the time when Anthony was praying and invoking the goodness of the Savior on her behalf. And concerning those who came to him, he often foretold some days or sometimes a month beforehand what was the cause of their coming. For some came only for the sake of seeing him, others through sickness, and others through suffering of evil spirits. And all thought the labor of the journey neither trouble nor loss, for each one returned aware that he had received benefit. But though saying such things and beholding such sights, he used to ask that no one should wonder at him for this, but should rather marvel at the Lord for having granted us men to know him as far as our powers extended. Here, for the remaining of this part, St. Athanasius describes St. Anthony as an old man. And as we've seen before, and we talked about last time, we see how St. Anthony is quite humble, and we see the outlook of St. Anthony to miracles and through casting out the demons. We see how he always instructs, as we saw last week, he instructs those who are being healed to be thankful to the Lord, and that he instructs them that this is the work of the Lord and not his work, and taking no credit in this way, but passing everything to the Lord and not taking any credit from men. We're gonna go over some strange tales of casting out of demons. Afterwards, on another occasion, having descended to the outer cells, he was asked to enter a vessel and to pray with the monks, and he alone perceived an exceedingly unpleasant smell. But those on board said that the stench arose from the fish and salt meat in the ship. He replied, however, the smell was different from that. And while he was speaking, a youth with an evil spirit, who had come and hidden himself in the ship, cried out. But the demon, being rebuked in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, departed from him, and the man became whole, and all knew that the evil smell arose from the demon. And another, a person of rank, came to him possessed by a demon, and the demon was so terrible that the man possessed did not know that he was coming to Anthony. But he even ate the excreta from his body. So those who brought him besought Anthony to pray for him. And Anthony, pitying the young man, prayed and kept watch with him all the night. And about dawn the young man suddenly attacked Anthony and gave him a push. But when those who came with him were angry, Anthony said, "Do not be angry with the young man, for it is not he but the demon which is in him." And being rebuked and commanded to go into dry places, the demon became raging mad, and he had done this. Wherefore, give thanks to the Lord for his attack on me. Thus is a sign of departure of the evil spirit. When Anthony had said this, straightway the young man had come whole, and having come at last to his right mind, knew where he was, and saluted the old man, and gave thanks to God. And then the next part is Anthony's vision concerning the forgiveness of his sins. And many monks have related with the greatest agreement and unanimity that many other such like things were done by him. But still these do not esteem as marvelous as certain other things appear to be. You guys, this somehow reminds of how the gospel writers say that many other miracles Christ did perform and many other people Christ did heal, and it's not sufficient to keep track of all of them. But it truly attests to how Saint Anthony was a blessed man and how the monastic movement and the monks truly lived, through the Spirit, a righteous life and a godly life. To the point that the miracles, even though of course they mean much to the people that are getting healed, um, still almost seem as if they are normal because of the amount of miracles that used to happen on his hand. But still, these do not seem as marvelous as certain other things appear to be. For once, when about to eat, having risen up to pray in the ninth hour, he perceived that he was caught up in the Spirit, and wonderful to tell. He stood and saw himself, as it were, from outside himself, and that he was led in the air by certain ones. Next, certain bitter and terrible beings stood in the air and wished to hinder him from passing through. I was beginning to read the book Orthodox Afterlife, and it details what happens after someone passes away, and it speaks quite similarly to how the soul, is lifted from the body and is now looking downwards and seeing the body, and then after that, there is, I forgot the name of the wording for it, but there is this phase where the person now is moving, um, and he is being, um, almost there is almost a debate between the angels and the demons on whether the soul belongs to God or whether the soul belongs with the demons. And so here it kind of recounts this. Terrible beings stood in the air and wished to hinder him from passing through. But when his conductors opposed them, which would be the angels, they demanded whether he was not accountable to them. And when they wished to sum up the account of his birth, Antony's conductors stopped them and saying, "The Lord has wiped the sins from his birth, but from the time he became a monk, devoted himself to God, it is permitted for you to make a reckoning." Then when they accused him and could not convict him, his way was free and unhindered. So this is as if St. Anthony is seeing the complete cycle of what happens when any of the souls depart. And that's why in the prayers of the Agbeya we pray that St. Mary comes to be with us at the moment that the soul leaves the body, in this um, in this moment as we are on our way to God. It's permitted for you. And immediately he saw himself, as it were, coming and standing by himself, and again he was Anthony as before. Then, forgetful of eating, he remained the rest of the day and through the whole night groaning and praying. For he was astonished when he saw against what mighty opponents our wrestling is, and by what labors we have to pass through the air. And he remembered that this is what the apostle said according to the prince of the power of the air. For in it the enemy has power to fight and to attempt to hinder those who pass through. Wherefore most earnestly he exhorted, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, that the enemy, having no evil thing to say against us, may be ashamed. And we who have learned this, let us be mindful of the apostle when he says, whether in the body I know not, or whether out of the body I know not. God knows. But Paul was caught up in the third heaven, and having heard things unspeakable, he came down, while Anthony saw that he had come to the air and contended until he was free. Of the passage of souls and how some were hindered of Satan. And he had also this favor granted him. For as he was sitting alone on the mountain, if ever he was in perplexity in his meditations, this was revealed to him by providence and prayer. And the happy man, as it is written, was taught of God. After this, when he once had a discussion with certain men who had come to him concerning the state of the soul, and of what nature its place will be after this life, the following night, one from above called him, saying, Anthony, rise up and go out and look. Having gone out, therefore, for he knew whom he ought to obey, looking up, for he beheld one standing and reaching to the clouds, tall, hideous, and fearful, and others ascending as though they were winged. And the figure stretched forth his hands, and some of those who were ascending were stayed by him, while others flew above, and having escaped heavenward, were borne aloft, free from care. As such, therefore, the giant gnashed his teeth, but rejoiced over those who fell back. So he's seeing a vision um, of what happens at the state, or pretty much um, symbolically, he's seeing a hideous figure, which is the devil, and he's seeing as people are ascending, which means that they have passed away and their souls are moving to their final resting place. Those who did not live a life according to Christ, now they go to be with the devil. But those who lived a life to be according to Christ and his commandments, they fly past this beast. And immediately a voice came to Anthony, do you understand what you see? And his understanding was open, and he understood that it was the passing of souls, and a tall being who stood was the enemy who envies the faithful. And those who he caught and stopped from passing through are accountable to him, while those whom he was unable to hold as they passed upwards had not been subservient to him. So having seen this, as it were, being reminded, he struggled the more daily to advance towards those things which were before. And these visions he was unwilling to tell. But as he spent much time in prayer and was amazed when those who were with him pressed him with questions and forced him, he was compelled to speak as a father who could not withhold nothing from his children. And he thought that as his conscience was clear, the account would be beneficial for them, that they might learn that discipline bore good fruit, and that visions were oftentimes the solace of their labors. Pope um, Pope Shenouda spoke and said, in what way is it not bragging? In what way is it not competition when we tell something good such as this? Here we see that it says when as his conscience was clear. As St. Anthony's sharing these things, he's not sharing them out of pride. He's sharing them as a father who wishes, as it says here, to withhold nothing from his children, that they might benefit. And so how do we know, or when is it not pride, or when is it not competition? It's when as Pope Shenouda said, there are three things. When there is a difference of spiritual level, when there is love involved, and when there is a fatherhood or a parenting aspect to the relationship. In this case, it is not judging and it's not pride when one helps the other to advance in a spiritual life, or by spiritual means. The next paragraph says how Anthony referenced or revered all ordained persons. Added to this, he was tolerant in disposition and humble in spirit. For though he was such a man, he observed the rule of the church most rigidly, and was willing that all the clergy should be honored above himself. For he was not ashamed to bow his head to bishops and to presbyters, and if ever a deacon came to him for help, he discoursed with him on what was profitable, but gave place to him in prayer, not being ashamed to learn himself. For often he would ask questions and desired to listen to those who were present, and if anyone said anything that was useful, he confessed that he was profited. And besides, his countenance had a great and wonderful grace, the gift also he had from the Saviour. And if he were present in a great company of monks, and anyone who did not know him previously wished to see him immediately coming forward, he passed by the rest and hurried to Anthony as though attracted by his appearance. So Abuna Tedros often said that, in his words, a priest is not a priest unless he is willing or able to learn even from children. Here we see how St. Anthony revered or respected the church and its orders and the clergy. This reminds me of a story from a priest. I heard it from directly from the priest whom it happened with. He was talking about Tamav Irini, and he's saying Tamav Irini also a very humble and example of humility to all of us. He's saying one time this priest was visiting Tamav Irini, and someone from there were other people as well who asked her a question. And Tamaverini began to answer the question, and then in the middle, or right away, she realized that there was a priest in the group as well, and so she she prostrated and asked Abuna. She said, forgive me, I started speaking. You go ahead and answer. And Abuna was explaining that she had back problems back then. She had severe back problems, but even so, she prostrated fully and did a matanya all the way down to the ground. An example of humility and of love. A person who's truly humble has no problem respecting, and a person who's truly humble has no problem submitting truly. And sometimes it is that humility or that submission that is teaching us to be humble. It is accepting to submit and to obey. It is truly on the road to us attaining humility. Yet neither in height nor in breadth was he conspicuous above others. So people knew him. How did they know him? They knew him because when they saw him, as been said, it is enough for me to see your face. So here it says when monks came and they did not know which one was Saint Anthony, somehow they were always able to find out and to be almost as attracted to him because of his godliness and his righteousness. But because, keep in mind that he was not different, nor was he, anything special in height or in breadth or in size, was he conspicuous from the others, but in serenity and his manner of the purity of his soul. For as his soul was free from disturbances, his outward appearance was calm. So from the joy of his soul, he possessed a cheerful countenance, and from his bodily movements could be perceived the condition of his soul, as it is written, when the heart is merry and the heart is happy, the countenance is cheerful, but when it is sorrowful, it is cast down. Thus Jacob recognized the counsel of Laban had in his heart, and said to his wives, the countenance of your father is not as it was yesterday and the day before. And Samuel recognized David, for he had mirthful eyes and teeth white as milk. But Anthony was recognized, for he was never disturbed, for his soul was at peace, and he was never downcast, for his mind was joyous. How he rejected the schism of Meletius and the heresies of Manus and Arius. He was altogether wonderful in faith and religious, for he never held communion with the Meletian schismatics, knowing their wickedness and apostasy from the beginning. Nor had he friendly dealings with the Manichaeans or any other heretics. For if he had only as far as advice that they should change to piety. For he thought and asserted that intercourse with these was harmful and destructive to the soul, In the same manner also he loathed the heresy of the Arians, and exhorted all neither to approach them nor to hold their erroneous belief. And once, when certain Arian madmen came to him, and when he had questioned them and learned their impiety, he drove them out from the mountain, saying that their words were worse than poison of serpents. How he confused the Arians. And once also the Arians, having lyingly asserted that Anthony's opinions were the same as theirs, he was displeased and angry against them. Then being summoned by the bishops and all the brethren, he descended from the mountain, and having entered Alexandria, he denounced the Arians. So here St. Anthony was accused of being an Arian, and so he was summoned to give an account, or to speak, to make to have a chance, as everyone did, as even Arius did, to have a chance to explain his belief and to talk and discuss whether they were true or not. So when he was summoned to do so, he went to Alexandria, and he denounced the Arians because this was not true, saying that their heresy was the last of all and a forerunner of Antichrist. And he taught the people that the Son of God was not a created being, because this is what the Arians preached or said. Neither had he come into existence from non-existence, but he was the eternal Word and wisdom of the essence of the Father. And therefore it was impious to say, their famous slogan was, there was a time when he was not. So it was impious to say, there was a time when he was not. For the Word was always coexistent with the Father, wherefore have no fellowship with the most impious Arians. For there is no communion between light and darkness. For you are good Christians, but when they say that the Son of the Father, the Word of God, is a created being, differ in naught from the heathen, since they worship that which is created rather than God the Creator, but believe that the creation itself is angry with them, because the number of the Creator, the Lord of all, by whom all things came into being, with those things which were originated. Now, of course, now that he's in Alexandria, he's going to visit his beloved disciple. As we said, the person who's writing this book is St. Athanasius, the patriarch. And he said, I was once a cupbearer. I was his servant. So now that he's in Alexandria, he visited St. Athanasius. So all the people therefore rejoiced when they heard the anti-Christian heresy anathematized by such a man. And all the people in the city ran together to see Anthony. And the Greeks and those who were called their priests, the pagan priests, came into the church, saying, we asked to see the man of God. For so they all called him. For in that place also the Lord cleansed many demons, and healed those who were mad. And many Greeks asked that they might even but touch the old man, believing that they should be profited. Assuredly, as many became Christians in those few days as one would have seen made in a year. Then when some thought that he was troubled by the crowds, and on this account turned them all away from him, he said undisturbedly that there were not more of them than the demons whom he wrestled with in the mountain. And when he was departing, and we were setting him forth on his way, as we arrived at the gate, a woman from behind cried out, Stay, thou man of God, my daughter is grievously vexed by a devil. Stay, I beseech you, lest I too harm myself with running. And the old man, when he heard her, was asked by us willingly stayed. And when the woman drew near, the child was cast on the ground. And when Anthony had prayed and called upon the name of Christ, the child was raised whole, for the unclean spirit had gone forth. And the mother blessed God, and all give thanks. And Anthony himself also rejoiced, departing to the mountain as though it were his own home. How he reasoned with divers Greek and philosophers at the outer mountain. And Anthony also was exceeding prudent in the wonder that although he had not learned the letters, he was ready-witted and one sagacious man. So Saint Anthony here, as we're about to find out, did not know Greek at all. Events, two Greek philosophers once came, thinking that they could try their skill on Anthony. And he was in the outer mountain, and having recognized who they were from their appearance, he came to them and said to them by means of an interpreter. So it seems that they also did not speak. Why, philosophers, did you trouble yourselves so much to come to a foolish man? And of course, at that time, it was thought that anyone who did not speak Greek or did not know philosophy was an ignorant man. And when they said that he was not a foolish man, but exceedingly prudent, he said to them, if you came to a foolish man, your labor is superfluous. But if you think me prudent, become as I am, for we ought to imitate what is good. And if I come to you, I should have imitated you. But if you to me, become as I am, for I am a Christian. For they departed with wonder, for they saw that even demons feared Anthony. And again others such as these met him in the outer mountain, and thought to mock him because he had not learned letters, which is Greek. And Anthony said to them, what do you say? Which is first, mind or letters? And which is the cause of which, mind of letters or letters of mind? And when they answered, mind is first and the inventor of letters, Anthony said, whoever, therefore, has a sound mind has not need of letters. This answer amazed both the bystanders and the philosophers, and they departed marveling that they had seen so much understanding in an ignorant man. As we said, the label for anyone who did not, speak Greek or know Greek, or read the legends and the heroes, is an ignorant man. For his manners were not rough, as though he had been reared in the mountain and there grown old, but graceful and polite, and his speech was seasoned with the divine salt, so that no one was envious, but rather all rejoiced over him. This is quite beautiful. It is a known fact that the environment has an effect on people. Where we live on the East Coast, we're often a bit rushed, and a little bit less relaxed than our neighbors in the South, for example, and where people, live, who would usually, like, someone lives in Alaska, for example, their character is shaped by the harshness of the environment that they live in. So you would imagine that someone lives in the middle of the desert on a mountain where there is barely any food, or water, where they're cut off from society. This would have a toll on them, and this would be the case, but not on a monk, not on a monk who lives or dwells with God. You'd have you'd think that old age would have a toll on a person, making them sometimes, in what we might see to be, impatient or angry or so on and so forth, but also not with a person, not with a Christian living with God. But his manner was not rough, as though he had been reared in a mountain or there grown old, but graceful and polite, and his speech was seasoned with divine salt, so that no one was envious, but rather all rejoiced over him who visited him. And after this again, certain others came, and these were men who were deemed wise among the Greeks. And they asked him a reason for our faith in Christ. But when they attempted the dispute concerning the preaching of the divine cross and meant to mock, of course, to them, these Greeks, they see crucifixions at that time. Part of the Roman Empire, they see people still being crucified. And to them, it is unspeakable to think. Of course, right now, almost no one thinks of the cross as a torturing, executing device anymore. But back then, this was the overwhelming understanding of what a cross was. It was a way for the Roman Empire to flex its muscle and to kind of sow fear in the hearts of people by by the cross. And they often said the cross was the epitome of cruelty because the way people were crucified was different, uh, based almost on the one crucifying them. So there were many, many ways to crucify people, and this all played into how this was truly a cursed thing and something that was dreaded and feared by most. So to the Greeks, this is a difficult thing that all of a sudden this becomes the symbol of Christianity. So they come disputing concerning the cross, and they meant to mock. Anthony stopped for a little, and first pitying their ignorance, said, though through an interpreter, who could skillfully interpret his words, which is more beautiful, to confess the cross or to attribute to those whom you call God's adultery and the seduction of boys? For that which is chosen by us is a sign of courage and a sure token of the contempt of death, while yours are the passions of licentiousness. Next, which is better, to say that the Word of God was not changed, but being the same, he took a human body for the salvation and well being of man, that having shared in human birth, he might make man partake in the divine and spiritual nature, or to liken the divine to senseless animals, consequently to worship four-footed beasts, creeping things, and the likeness of men. This slide has a very compelling and a very good argument, and I think um, it sums up the work that Saint Athanasius wrote, which is called "Against the Heathens," which is his first part before on the Incarnation. But truly, he tells them, take a look at your gods. Of course, it is hard um, to say or to imagine that God came down to be crucified, and not just to die, but to be crucified, which is a very humiliating and a very tough death. But he says, compare that to a God who, and Greek mythology was full of this, gods who cheat, and as we're about to see, do very horrible things. They lie, they cheat, they fight, they steal, they do all these things. Which is better? Which makes more sense? To be crucified, and through the crucifixion, the power over death is shown, and the fear of death is no longer there and done away with, or to do these things simply to live by, as he says here, as senseless animals, or just moved by the drive of um, of animals. For these things are the objects of reverence of you wise men. But how do you dare to mock us, who say that Christ has appeared as man, seeing that you, bringing the soul from heaven, assert that it was strayed and fallen from the vault of the sky into the body? This is some of the beliefs of the philosophers of the Greeks, that the souls dropped from heaven. And would that you had said that it had fallen into human body alone, and not asserted that it passes and changes into four-footed beasts and creeping things. For our faith declares that the coming of Christ was for the salvation of men, but you err because you speak of soul as not generated, and reconsidering the power and loving kindness of providence, think that the coming of Christ in the flesh was not impossible with God. But you, although calling the soul in the likeness of mind, connect it with false and feign in your myth that it is changeable, and consequently introduce the idea that mind itself is changeable by reason of soul. For whatever is the nature of a likeness, such necessarily is the nature of that which it is a likeness, of which it is a likeness. But whenever you think such a thought concerning mine, remember that you blaspheme even the Father of mine himself. Let's move forward to the next paragraph. Paragraph 75 says, concerning the cross, which you say to be the better to bear it when a plot is brought about by wicked men, nor to be in fear of death brought about under any form whatever, or to prate about the wanderings of Osiris and Isis, the plots of Typhon and the flight of Kronos, his eating his children and the slaughter of his father, for this is your wisdom. But how if you mock the cross, do not marvel at the resurrection? For the same men who told us of the latter wrote the former. Or why, when you make mention of the cross, are you silent about the dead who are raised, the blind who received their sight, and the paralytics who were healed, the lepers who were cleansed, the walking upon the sea, the rest of the signs and wonders which show that Christ is no longer a man but God? To me you seem to do yourselves much injustice, and not to have carefully read our scriptures, but read and see that the deeds of Christ prove him to be God, come upon earth for salvation of men. But do you tell us your religious beliefs? What can you say of senseless creatures except senselessness and ferocity? But if, as I hear, you wish to say that these things are spoken of by you as legends, you allegorize the rape of the maiden Persephone of the earth, and the lameness of Hephaestus of fire, and allegorize the air as Hera and the sun as Apollo, the moon as Artemis, and the sea as Poseidon. Nonetheless, you do not worship God himself, but serve the creature rather than God who created all things. For if because creation is beautiful you compose such legends, still it was fitting that you should stop short at admiring and not make gods of the things created, so that you should not give the honor to the Creator, to that which is created, of the Creator to that which is created. Since if you do, it is time for you to divert the honor of the master builder to the house built by him, the general soldier, and of the general to the soldier. What then can you reply to these things, that we may know whether the cross has anything worthy of mockery? So he is saying that that the Greeks allegorize their gods to be the certain creation, whether it's the sun, the sea, or the moon, and they give credit to such gods, but not to the creator of the natures on which these gods have been modeled after, and thus robbing God from due credit. Paragraph 77. But when they were at a loss, turning hither and there, Anthony smiled and said again through an interpreter, sight itself carries the conviction of these things. Lean upon demonstrative arguments, and as you have in this art, wish also not to worship God until after such proof. Do you tell first how things in general and specially the recognition of God are accurately known. It is true demonstrative argument or the working faith. And which is better, faith which comes through the inworking of God, or demonstration by arguments? And when they answered that faith which comes through the inworking was better and accurate, you have answered well. For faith arises from disposition of soul, but dialectic from the skill of its inventor. So here, perhaps philosophy is quite similar to what we have been grown accustomed to here, which is demanding a demonstrative proof, demanding a demonstrative argument for everything. And perhaps the folly of our education is that completely treating religious things and spiritual things as scientific things and demanding that for them to be taken seriously or for them to be admitted or addressed, they have to have a demonstrative argument. So you say God exists. Where is your demonstrative argument? Where is he? And this completely negates everything um, that is spiritual. And these things are quite different because the methods of the scientific realm in order um, to investigate the spiritual realm does not make any sense. It is like me using, the geography in order to investigate or measure or balance science. It does not make sense. Or for me to be using language arts and rhetoric in order for me to test out math or mathematics or prove the theories of mathematics. It just does not make sense. Think Origen here. This is a quote from Origen, who says, "Who enters on a voyage and contracts a marriage, becomes the father of children, or sows seed into the ground without believing that better things will result from doing so. If the hope and belief of a better future is the support of life in every uncertain enterprise, why should not this faith rather be rationally accepted by him who believes on better grounds in the existence of a God who was the creator of all these things?" He's saying faith exists in life in general. If any of us buys a car, we trust that um, the people did their due diligence and they, properly engineered the car. And they did, although there was a scandal a couple of years ago about a certain car manufacturer who cheated on their emissions. But generally, of course, and there's a backlash, right? And it is expected that they shouldn't, even though it goes against this hallmark of, or perhaps what is deified as, get rich quick, the get rich quick mindset of do what you can in order that you can get rich and get by, and in so this is what's good. But faith exists in life. If anyone hops on a plane, we have faith that the pilot has done his training, that the aircraft is worthy to fly, that the engineering has been done properly. If anyone buys a product, we trust that the ingredients are there, so on and so forth. When we, turn on a switch, we trust that the electric company is not just going to take our money, but they're going to provide a service. When we pay with a credit card or even when we pay with a banknote, all these things require us to have a tremendous amount of faith in the institutions and systems and companies. Of oftentimes we don't know, we haven't seen the work that's been done, nor can we verify in any way. But if this is a part of life and a fact of life, then why can't we have faith? And why do we, when it comes now to religious things and spiritual things, we demand, as it comes here, or as St. Anthony said, demonstrative arguments? So he answered that faith. Of course, the Greeks answered that faith, which comes through the inworking, was better than accurate knowledge. And Anthony said, "You have answered well, for faith arises from disposition of soul, but dialectic form of skill of its inventors. Wherefore, to those who have the inworking through faith, demonstrative argument is needless and even superfluous. For what we know through faith is this you attempt to prove through words, and often you're not even able to express what we understand. So the inworking through faith is better and stronger than your professional arguments." Moving forward, we Christians therefore hold the mystery, not the wisdom of Greek arguments, but in power of faith richly supplied to us by God through Jesus Christ. And to show that this statement is true, behold now, without having learned letters, we believe in God, knowing through his works his providence over all things. And to show that our faith is effective, so now we are supported by faith in Christ, and you by professional I don't know that words. The signs of the end of the idols among you are being done away, but our faith is extending everywhere. You, by your arguments and quibbles, have converted none from Christianity to paganism. We teach through faith on Christ, expose your Christ as God and the Son of God. You, by your eloquence, do not hinder the teaching of Christ, but we, by the mention of Christ crucified, put all demons to flight, whom you fear, as if they were gods. Where the sign of the cross is, magic is weak, and witchcraft has no strength. Tell us, therefore, where your oracles are now. Where are the charms of the Egyptians? Where the delusions of the magicians? When did all these things cease and grow weak, except when the cross of Christ arose? Is it then a fit subject for mockery, and not rather the things brought to naught by it, and convicted of weakness? For this is a marvelous thing, that your religion was never persecuted, but even was honored by men in every city, while the followers of Christ are persecuted, and still our side flourishes and multiplies. What is yours, though praised and honor, perishes, while the faith and teaching of Christ, though mocked by you and often persecuted by kings, has filled the world. For when has the knowledge of God so shone forth? Or when has self-control and the excellence of virginity appeared as now? Or when has death been so despised, except when the cross of Christ has appeared? And this no one doubts when he sees the martyr despising death for the sake of Christ, when he sees for Christ's sake the virgins and the church keeping themselves pure and undefiled. This paragraph is quite beautiful and a very good answer to and a very good summary to the pagans who were coming to mock Christianity and the cross. All right, next is going to be how he confused the philosophers by healing a certain vexed with demons. And these signs are sufficient to prove that the faith of Christ alone is the true religion. But see, you still do not believe and are seeking for arguments. We, however, make our proof not in persuasive words of Greek wisdom, as our teacher has it, but we persuade the faith which manifestly precedes argumentative proof. Behold, there are here some vexed with demons. Now there were certain who had come to him very disquieted by demons, and bringing them into the midst, he said, do you cleanse them, or by whatever art or magic you choose, call upon your idols, or if you are unable, put away your strife with us, and you shall see the power of the cross over Christ. And having said this, he called upon Christ and signed the sufferers 2 or 3 times with the sign of the cross. And immediately the men stood up whole, and the right hand, and immediately gave thanks unto the Lord. And the philosophers, as they are called, wondered, which are the Greeks, the pagans, wondered and were astonished exceedingly at the of the man and at the sign. But Anthony said, why do you marvel at this? We are not the doers of these things, but it is Christ who works them by means of those who believe in him. Believe therefore also yourselves, and you shall see that with us there is no trick of words, but faith through love, which if you yourselves should obtain, you will no longer seek demonstrative arguments, but will consider faith in Christ sufficient. These are the words of Anthony, and they, marveling at this, also saluted him and departed, confessing the benefit that they had received from him. We're going to be wrapping up, about 7 more paragraphs to go. Next one is how the emperors wrote to Anthony and his response. The fame of Anthony came even unto kings, for Constantine Augustus and his sons Constantius and Constans the Augusti wrote letters to him, and as to a father, and begged an answer from him. And he made nothing very much of the letters, nor did he rejoice at the messages, but was the same as he had been before emperors wrote to him. But when they brought the letters to him, he called the monks and said, "Do not be astonished if an emperor writes to you, for he is a man, but rather wonder that God wrote the law for men and has spoken to us through his own Son." So he was unwilling to receive the letters, saying that he did not know how to write an answer to such things. But being urged by the monks, because the emperors were Christians, and lest they should take offense on the ground that they had been spurned or rejected, he consented that they should be read and wrote an answer approving them because they worshipped Christ and giving them counsel on things pertaining salvation. So when, of course, this is a very famous event that happened, is often mentioned that when the emperor wrote to St. Anthony, he left it aside and did not read it. And when he was urged by the monks to read it, he said, notice how Christ is inviting us, has written to us, inviting us to read his scriptures every day. And then when he was actually responding, he finally wrote not to think much of the present, but rather to remember the judgment that is coming, to know that Christ alone was the true and eternal King. He begged them to be merciful and to give heed to justice and the poor, and they, having received, thus was dear to all and desired to consider him as a father. How he saw in a vision the present doings of the Arians, and being known to be so great a man, therefore, having thus given answers to those who visited him, he returned again to the inner mountain and maintained his wonted discipline. And often when people came to him, he was sitting or walking, as it is written in Daniel. He became dumb, and after a season he resumed the thread of what had been saying before to the brethren who were with him. So pretty much he's seeing visions, or he's in a trance, or now he's moved by the Spirit in a different place, or he's seeing something else. And his companions perceived that he was seeing a vision. For often he was on the mountains, he saw what was happening in Egypt. And he told it to Serapion the bishop, who was indoors with him, and who saw that Anthony was wrapped in a vision. Once he fell, as it were, in a trance, and groaned much at what he saw. Then after, at a time, having turned to the bystanders with groans and trembling, he prayed, and falling on his knees, he remained so a long time. And having arisen, the old man wept. His companions, therefore, trembling and terrified, desired to learn from him what it was. And they troubled him much, until he was forced to speak. And with many groans he spoke as follows: "O my children, it were better to die before what has appeared in the vision to come to pass." And when again they asked, having burst into tears, he said, "Wrath is about to seize the church, and it is on the point of being given to men who are like senseless beasts. For I saw," the vision that he saw, "the table of the Lord's house, and mules standing around it on all sides in a ring, and kicking the things therein, just like a herd kicks when it." "And you saw," said he, for he heard a voice saying, "My altar shall be defiled." These things the old man saw. And after 2 years, the present inroad of the Arians and the plunder of the churches took place. And when they forced and made the heathen carry them, and they forced the heathen from the prisons to join in their services, and in their presence did upon the table as. Then we all understood that these kicks of the mule signified to Anthony what the Arians, senselessly like beasts, are doing now. But when he saw this vision, he comforted those with him, saying, "But be not downcast, my children, for as the Lord has been angry, so again he will heal us, and the church her own order, and shall shine. And you shall behold the persecuted restored, and the wickedness again withdrawn to its own hiding place, and pious faith speaking boldly in every place with all. Defile not yourselves with the Arians, not that of the apostles, but that of demon level, yet rather it is barren and understanding, like the senselessness of these mules. And so it's true that throughout history, of course, there were some times where the emperor switched from under the influence of the Arians, and it happened that in many times, I think the 5th century, there has always been two patriarchs in Alexandria. There was the Orthodox patriarch of Alexandria. Always been a patriarch, like a patriarch that was sent from the emperor, and this was an Arian, and he reported to the emperor. And it happened throughout time where order of the emperor, the soldiers came to try to instill the Arian emperor, and the people of Egypt rejected, and the violent consequences that happened at that time. But thankfully, in due time, the church was restored to orthodoxy, and the world was restored to orthodoxy. That his healings were done through Christ alone by prayers. Such are the words of Anthony, and we ought not to doubt whether such marvels were wrought by the hand of a man. For it is the promise of the Savior when he says, "If you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, remove hence, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you." This is in Matthew chapter 17. And again, John chapter 16, it says, "Verily I say unto you, if you shall ask, whatever you shall ask the Father in my name, he will give you. Ask, and you shall receive." And again, in Matthew chapter 10, it says, "He himself, it is he who says to his disciples, to all who believe in him, heal the sick, cast out demons, freely you have received, freely give." And so here, again, he is telling us how St. Anthony always, or how the miracles and all these wonders were done through Christ, not through, of course, the Christians or the disciples. Anthony, at any rate, healed not by commanding, but by prayer and speaking in the name of Christ. We had a Bible study in this past year where we looked over all the people that raised the dead in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And we saw that in the case of the Old Testament and the New Testament, for Paul and Peter and Elijah and Elisha, they raised the dead by praying and asking God. But when Christ raised the dead, or when Christ commanded someone to be raised, it was not through prayer, but it was through the command, right? And so at any rate, St. Anthony did not command, but it was, of course, prayer and speaking in the name of Christ. That it was clear to all that it was not himself who worked, but the Lord who showed mercy by his means and healed the sufferers. But Anthony's part was only prayer and discipline, for the sake of which he stayed in the mountain, rejoicing in the contemplation of divine things, but grieving when troubled by much people, and dragged to the outer mountain, for all judges used to ask him to come down, because it was impossible for them to enter on account of their following litigants. But nevertheless they asked him to come that they might see him. When therefore he avoided it and refused to go to them, they remained firm and sent to him all the more the prisoners under charge of soldiers, that on account of these he might come down. Being forced by necessity, and seeing them lamenting, he came into the outer mountain, and again his labor was not unprofitable, for his coming was advantageous and serviceable to many. He was of profit to the judges, counseling them to prefer justice to all things, to fear God, to know that with what judgment they judged, they should be judged. But he loved more than all things his sojourn in the mountain. And we are almost done. How wisely he answered a certain duke. We have two more paragraphs left. At another time, suffering the same compulsion at the hands of them who had need, and after many entreaties from the commander of the soldiers, he came down, and when he had come, he spoke to them shortly of the things which make for salvation, and concerning those who wanted him, and was hastening away. But when the Duke, as he is called, entreated him to stay, he replied that he could not linger among them, and persuaded him by a pretty smile, saying, "Fishes, if they remain long on dry land, die, and so monks lose their strength if they loiter among you and spend their time with you. Wherefore, as fish must hurry to the sea, so must we hasten to the mountain, lest haply if we delay, we forget the things within us." And the general, having heard this and many other things from him, was amazed, and said, "Of a truth, this man is the servant of God, for unless he were beloved of God, whence could an ignorant man have such great understanding?" Of the Duke Belasius, and how warned by Antony he met a miserable end. And a certain general Belasius, by name, persecuted us Christians bitterly on account of his regard for the Arians, that name of ill omen. And as his ruthlessness was so great that he beat virgins and stripped and scourged monks, Antony at this time wrote a letter as follows and sent to him: "I see wrath coming upon you, wherefore cease to persecute the Christians, lest haply wrath catch hold of you. For even now it is on point of coming upon you." But Belasius laughed and threw the letter on the ground and spit on it and insulted the bearers, bidding them to tell this to Antony: "Since you take thought for the monks, soon I will come after you also." And 5 days had not passed before the wrath came upon him, for Belasius and Nestorius, the prefect of Egypt, went forth to the first halting place from Alexandria, which was called Cherio, and both were on horseback. And the horses belonged to Belasius, and were the quietest of all his stable. But they had not gone far towards the place, when the horses began to frisk with one another, as they are wont to do. And suddenly the quieter on which Nestorius sat, with a bite dismounted Belasius and attacked him, and tore his thigh so badly with his teeth that he was borne straight back to the city, and in 3 days he died. All wondered because of what Antony had foretold had been so speedily fulfilled. And finally, how he bore the infirmities of the weak and his great benefits to all Egypt. This is a good place to end. Thus, therefore, he warned the cruel. But the rest who came to him, he so instructed that they straightway forgot their lawsuits and felicitated those who were in retirement from the world. And he championed those who were wronged in such a way that they would imagine that he, not the others, was the sufferer. Further, he was able to be of such use to all, and that many soldiers and men who had great possessions laid aside the burdens of life and became monks for the rest of their days. And it was as if a physician to Egypt. For who in grief met Antony and did not return rejoicing? Who came mourning from his dead and did not immediately put off his sorrow? Who came in anger and was not converted to friendship? What poor and low-spirited man met him, who hearing him and looking upon him did not despise wealth and console himself in his poverty? What monk, having been neglectful, came to him and became not all the stronger? What young man, having come to the mountain and seen Antony, did not immediately deny himself pleasure and love temperance? Who, when tempted by a demon, came to him and became troubled with doubts and did not get quietness of this week's portion? God willing, we have just a couple more paragraphs to go.